the hell is this supposed to be? Well, it has been a while since the last time I did one of my visual storytelling videos, huh? And well, I mean, nothing really big has happened since then, like, can't really think of anything, just like really nothing at all. So, in the last video we talked about the comic script. What? 6 months ago? Really? Holy hell! Anyways, we finally have our story, we know what's gonna happen, we know who's gonna say what, who's gonna do what. So it's finally time to actually draw! Let the fun begin! Let's do the storyboards! Okay, so do I start with the establishing shot? What do I show next? Isn't this panel boring? Should I switch things up a bit with different angles? Why does this take so long even though I know what's gonna happen? Basically, every time I do storyboards I go through a mini crisis. In a way, this is the more creative part in the whole manga creation process. If you do it right, then your manga will have a wonderful flow, your paneling will be creative but not distracting, and the emotional scenes will be super impactful. If you do it wrong, then your manga will be, well, simply hard to read. There is nothing more distracting in your manga than not knowing what panel or what speech bubble to read next. Also, repetitive paneling can make a scene which you intend to be very emotional and impactful seem to be rather boring and dull and not important at all. So yeah, it's hard. Every time I do storyboarding, I let literally anything distract me. Let me sort out my postcard collection that I haven't touched in months. No, I should go back to work. Let me check my emails. No, stop distracting yourself. You checked your emails an hour ago. What's happening on Twitter? Let me check my emails. Should I sort out my paperwork? Maybe I have a new email. So, similar to when you outline your story, you have to make sure you work in an environment where the distractions are minimal. Okay, this introduction was unnecessarily long. Let's talk about the hopefully helpful stuff. Storyboards. In Japan they call them name for some reason. Do you know why? If you know why, let me know in the comments section. I call them storyboards, even though this name is usually used in cinematography, but there is literally no other useful name I could find, because sketches just don't do it. The main point of the storyboards is to give you a rough idea what is gonna be where later on the finished manga page, so you don't have to improvise when you do the actual drawing. Unless of course your script is super detailed, like I mentioned in the previous episode on comic script. Then you might not need a storyboard. So this step is where you think about how you want to design your page and play around with panels and different compositions. This is where you start visualizing everything that was in your head before and see whether it works out the way you imagined it to. The storyboards help you to see whether your story flow is clear, how much space you will need for the speech bubbles, and also how many pages there will be in the end. It is important to do them because at this stage you still can change things easily. And different people have different approaches to this. Some artists, like me, make them really rough and minimal, and some storyboards look like a mini version of the finished manga pages. How detailed you want your storyboards to be is completely up to you, and maybe your editor. As you can tell from the beginning of the video, my way is pretty special. From my storyboards you cannot tell that I'm actually an artist, that I can draw. Whenever someone tells me they can only draw stick figures, and as an artist you get told it like a lot. All I want to tell them is just like, dude, you should see my storyboards. Your stick figures are a beauty in comparison. So in a way the storyboards are a little bit like your handwriting. It's more like to capture the idea rather than to, be very clear and polished. I don't know, that's my handwriting at least. Anyways, your storyboards can be messy, but I guess if you want to get feedback, then you should try to make them at least somewhat clear. I officially apologize to anyone who ever had to read my storyboards. I'm sorry. When you draw the frames, you don't have to worry about the accuracy of the size or draw out all the little details, unless you want to. Try to focus on how you want to place the characters within the frame. and where the speech bubbles and captions are gonna go. Basically, you are creating little thumbnails of future panels. Use the speech bubbles to guide the reader's eye. For example, in this case, it could be confusing what panel will be read next. By placing the speech bubble partly into the previous panel, you know what panel will be read next. Here is how the reader's eye would be guided on this particular page. There are also some visual tricks, like a hand reaching out from one panel to the next. I love those things when I see them. If the reader doesn't even notice how his eyes are guided through the page, then you did a good job. If the reader is confused on what panel or speech bubble to read next, then the flow is broken, and the scene might not be as effective as it should have been. I must say, even after years of drawing manga, it's still not always easy to avoid these mistakes. While you draw, some things might make sense to you, but once you start reading it in a flow, then suddenly you are confused what speech bubble will be coming up next. That's why you should always proofread your storyboard before you go on to the next stage. Or best case scenario, let someone else read it, just to make sure there is no confusion. Here are some more rules of thumb which will make your pages a smooth read. Generally, bigger panels are more important than small panels. Make sure a panel containing important story parts get the space they deserve, otherwise they might lose their effect. For example, the first time your protagonist or any other important character is introduced, it should be in a bigger panel, so the reader knows, this character is important. Try to vary the panels, don't always show the character from the same angle, distance, and so on, unless it's for an intended effect. But also don't overdo it. Build in special angles where it's necessary. Don't build in a different angle into every single picture. Be mindful about it. Panels from high angle can feel isolating and distant, and low angle panels can show a character in intimidating light. In some cases you want such moves, but in some it might create an unwanted effect. The horizontal space between the panels should be wider than the vertical space. Depending on the genre or style, more emotional or action-packed scenes can be drawn into askew, slanted panels, not just straight panels. This is especially typical for shoujo manga and is less prominent in shonen, which is a shame, I think, because I think it has a great effect and can be used in many different ways. Do not place any text or important content into the margins. This is very important, especially if you are planning to print your comic. But even if you're not printing it, it's just aesthetically more pleasing if no text or important content is pushed to the very edge of the page. On a more advanced level, make the reader turn pages by creating more tension at the end of each 2 pages, basically before they turn the page. Or if you plan to print the book, place your most impressive drawings at the top right or left corner, basically the one corner a reader will see when they quickly flip through the book. But this is something to think about more once you have mastered the general page building. I personally try to do the page turners sometimes, but I definitely don't think about the pretty pictures in the corner. With my current level, it would just restrain me instead of improving my manga pages. If it would cause you too much headache and prevent you from doing actual storyboards, then just don't pay attention to these things in the first place. It is also super acceptable to use other manga as reference. I do it all the time. I pick a couple of manga where I like the paneling and see what I can use as inspiration for my own pages. It especially helps when you get stuck, and our brain loves to get stuck while it has to make shit up. I also often make notes on things that will help me later when I draw the actual pages. Mostly it's just explaining what the panel is supposed to show, as my drawings are, well, they are what they are. They work for me, okay? Also, storyboarding for webcomics probably works quite different, but I'm not an expert on this as I draw my manga with print in mind. That's why I always plan 2 pages together, so I can see what they will look like when they are next to each other in the finished book. This way you can avoid some repetitions or just things that would not work together. Webcomics are read from top to bottom, ongoing, and there is usually a lot more space in between the single panels. This format does give you a lot more freedom as you are not constrained to the space of 1 page, so you can go on, but you might face some difficulties if you decide to print your comic. I heard quite a few people complain about how Killing Stalking has quite a lot of just white space in between the panels, which is basically the result of the comic being published first on an online page. There are so many things to consider when you do storyboards. Establishing the space the action takes in, camera angles, dialogue, and so many more. But the best thing to do is to just start drawing and see where it goes. Draw the storyboards for one chapter of your story, maybe one shot, and give it to some other people to read and see what they have to say. A lot of artists do get the paneling right without thinking about all these rules I mentioned before, especially if they read a lot of comics and manga themselves. But we should learn on how to communicate our stories in the most clear way, while still kinda leaving some space for experimentation. Personally, I'm not a fan of just straight, square panels on each page. They work pretty well in certain genres, like comedy for example, but for my story, more playful panels kinda fit better, and they are more expressive. I like my panels to be part of the art, so to say. My idols are, for example, the Batman comic, or Holzesserin and Salamandress comics. Another favorite of mine is Vom Anfang by Caroline Reich. But if that play with the panels confuses your reader, then in the worst case, they will just stop reading your manga. So figure out what works best for you and what makes your story flow better. So yeah, with all that in mind, let's create some storyboards. Do you have any tips for me? What is your approach? Is storyboarding pretty easy for you, or is it hell on earth? Also, when you read comics, do you notice things like paneling and the flow of the page? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment there if you have anything to say. And I would really like if you subscribe to my channel and if you like this video. I'll see you hopefully soon and not in like 6 months. Bye!